The Scandinavian country of Norway was invaded by Nazi Germany on April 9, 1940. Unlike some other European countries of similar or even larger size, the Germans had to fight especially hard to conquer Norway. But what of Norway's Navy, or Royal Norwegian Navy as it was known? It may be a relatively small country, ranking only 61st in the world in total land area, but its famous fjords, rugged coast, and many islands give Norway one of the longest coastlines in the world, comfortably in the top 10 on that score. How could the Germans guard such a long coastline punctuated with deep fjords? Not very well, as it turned out. And how did the Norwegians assist the Allies in their fight against Hitler? Let's find that out. The country of Norway, even when it wasn't an independent nation-state, has a naval history dating back to 955. The Kingdom of Denmark-Norway shared a navy that was known as the Common Fleet from 1509 to 1814. The Royal Norwegian Navy would become a separate navy once more after the country broke away from Denmark in 1814, and remained so even during the country's union under Swedish control. Finally, Norway became an independent kingdom on June 7, 1905. Norway chose to be neutral in World War I, even though its merchant shipping was heavily hit by German U-boats and commercial raiders from other countries, particularly Russia and Sweden. By 1939, the Norwegian Navy was very modest, to say the least. It consisted of just 4 antediluvian coastal battleships, 3 Drog-class destroyers, 3 first-class torpedo boats, and 26 second-class torpedo boats. It also had 9 submarines, all of which were quite outdated and included 3 Class A subs, dating back to 1913 and 6 Class B subs built in 1922. Some more vessels were added to the fleet in 1940. However, it remained a remarkably smallish navy for a country with such an enormous and complex coastline. The Norwegians hoped they might escape invasion by Nazi Germany, but that was wishful thinking. It was inevitable that Hitler would have designs on Norway. The country had a lot to offer. For one thing, it was rich in minerals, particularly iron ore, which Germany's gigantic war machine desperately needed. Norway could also supply the heavy water that would be needed for Germany's nuclear program, which was very much in contention through most of the war. For another thing, Norway was strategically superb for the Germans. It offered direct access to both the North Atlantic and the Arctic region, allowing Germany to intercept Allied movements in that entire swathe of the Northern Hemisphere. Having Norway would later allow the Nazis to try and play havoc with the lucrative shipping lanes connecting North America and Britain with the Soviet Union, once the Soviets joined the Allies. With the invasion in April 1940, Norway lost some of its fleet, including 2 of its battleships. It also lost 4 of its submarines, 3 of which were scuttled by their own crews rather than fall into Nazi hands. One of Norway's submarines, B-1, was able to escape and sail for England. However, Germany's Kriegsmarine took a beating during its naval battles against Norway. Allied British and French naval forces had joined the Norwegian Navy in its defense against Germany, resulting in big losses for the invaders. Although small in size, Norway's navy was surprisingly formidable, being well supported by its numerous artillery batteries that dotted its coastline. An example of this artillery prowess was seen when the German fleet was heading for the capital city, Oslo. Their progress was significantly hampered when 2 28-centimeter guns at Oscarsborg Fortress opened fire, followed by relentless shelling from 15-centimeter guns on the eastern side of the Drobak Strait. The Germans were taken aback by the fury of Norwegian and Allied defenses. It is well documented that Hitler was shocked by how tough it was for Germany to overcome Norway, particularly in the naval arena. Historians believe the Norwegian campaign left such a bitter taste for Hitler that he never fully recovered his respect for his surface navy. That does explain Hitler's overt reliance on his army, or Wehrmacht, and air force, the Luftwaffe, for most of his bolder and large-scale strategic plans after the Norwegian campaign. he did continue to fully support the below-surface navy, the famous U-boat division. This artillery fire inflicted heavy damage on the German heavy cruiser Blücher, which eventually sank courtesy of land-based torpedoes fired from Oscarsburg. Over 1,000 crew and soldiers aboard the German heavy cruiser were lost. The German invasion fleet was forced to retreat south and had to rely on airstrikes by its Luftwaffe to overpower the Norwegian artillery batteries on land. That delay, however, was just enough time for the Norwegian government, along with King Haakon VII of Norway and his entourage, to escape capture and flee to the safety of London. Before fleeing the country, King Haakon VII made a speech to his nation on May 17 from a radio station in the northern city of Tromsø. It was the only free broadcasting station left in Norway, and this is what the king, himself a naval officer, had to say: "I want to convey a special thanks to our Navy for its war efforts. Its operations have been fully equal to its best traditions and are highly appreciated by our allies." The Norwegians put up a valiant resistance to German invasion that last 2 months. That was longer than countries like Poland and the Netherlands took to be overrun by Germany. It even took longer to fully occupy Norway than it did France, with the northern half of Norway proving very difficult to capture for the Germans. And even when Germany overcame the country, the Norwegian resistance proved a huge headache for the occupiers for the rest of the war. An administrative council imposed by the Nazis was opposed by the majority of Norwegians, and resistance grew even more intense when a Nazi government gained control under the leadership of the neo-Nazi Vidkun Quisling. He was so despised by his fellow Norwegians that today the word Quisling means someone who is a traitor and sells himself or his country out. Large-scale industrial sabotage eventually became a constant in Norway throughout Nazi occupation, with many sabotage attempts made against heavy water production facilities in Rjukan in southern Norway, siding with the Allies. As said, the Norwegian government and royal family were able to flee Norway and get to England. That happened on June 7, 1940, with the Norwegian king aboard Britain's HMS Devonshire. Along with them came 13 Norwegian vessels as well as 500 officers and sailors of the Royal Norwegian Navy. What would be known as the Free Norwegian Navy would be steadily augmented by a number of Norwegian men who managed to later escape from occupied Norway or who were living abroad. Men from Norway's merchant navy also joined the ranks of Norwegian sailors based out of Britain for the remainder of the war. What few Norwegian vessels managed to escape would still fly the Norwegian naval ensign, but they would be under the direct operational control of Britain's Royal Navy. Unfortunately, the 13 Norwegian vessels that sailed to Britain were quite pitiful, with only one, a small destroyer, being somewhat modern, having been launched in 1936. The other destroyer in the ragtag Norwegian fleet dated back to 1908, and the remaining 11 ships that escaped were either small patrol vessels or fishery protection vessels. Nevertheless, the Norwegians were resolute in assisting the Allies wherever possible. The Free Norwegian Navy did go about modernizing its fleet, including ordering 2 motor torpedo boats, numbers 5 and 6 from the British. Those 2 MTBs would join the British 11th MTB flotilla, which patrolled the English Channel from early summer 1940. That flotilla was kept very busy, fighting off German U-boat and E-boat attacks, firing torpedoes on enemy ships, and protecting their own convoys, as well as being actively involved in rescue operations. However, Norway's MTB-6 had to be abandoned within a few months due to heavy leaking, while its MTB-5 blew up in an explosion in June 1941 while in Dover Harbor. The loss of the 2 MTBs would be the first losses suffered by the Free Norwegian Navy. The other Norwegian ships, nearly all badly outdated, had to be refitted and modernized and were mostly put to good use as part of Britain's minesweeping flotilla, which deployed out of Dundee in Scotland. These refitted Norwegian ships were especially effective at clearing coastal convoy routes of mines throughout the war. As noted, the Norwegian Merchant Navy, which was quite large by the time war broke out, played a significant role in the Free Norwegian Navy. One specific unit is particularly worth mentioning. Its official title was the Norwegian Naval Independent Unit, but it went by the nickname the Shetland Bus. This group of fishing vessels were based in the Shetland Islands off northern Scotland, and their function was to facilitate clandestine operations to Norway. The group was overseen by Britain's Secret Intelligence Service (SIS) and Special Operations Executive (SOE) in conjunction with the Norwegian government in exile in London. The Shetland Bus proved invaluable in its assistance to Norway's resistance movement as the shipping vessels smuggled secret agents, couriers, and instructors to and from Norway, as well as transporting weapons and materials for sabotage into Norway. The vessels in the Shetland Bus paid a high price, though, as both German countermeasures and furious winter storms in the North Atlantic claimed many ships and lives. The losses got so bad that operations had to be temporarily stopped in 1943 in order to allow replacement to be found. By the latter part of 1942 into 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic between the Allies and German U-boats and surface ships was at its fiercest. Norway's contribution by then was in the form of 2 destroyers, which would grow to 5 destroyers as well as 4 corvettes and 3 patrol vessels. The patrol ships also acted as escorts for merchant ships coming to and from England as and when needed. Nearly all of these Norwegian ships formed part of the Liverpool Escort Forces, which was under the command of the C&C Western Approaches. There were Norwegian losses both before and during this period of the Battle of the Atlantic. 1 corvette was torpedoed in November 1942, resulting in the loss of 47 men. Another one sank, also in the Atlantic, this time in 1944 when it collided with a destroyer. A 3rd corvette was lost in December 1944 when it struck a mine off the coast of Finnmark in the farthest north of Norway. It had only been commissioned less than a year before. Even so, Norwegian corvettes and submarines were credited with damaging or sinking a number of German U-boats. This included U-974, which was sunk on April 19, 1944, by 4 torpedoes from the Norwegian submarine Ula. The British High Command often cited their admiration for Norwegian ships and their crews and what they were able to achieve. This was especially true of the incredible job that Norwegian-flagged ships did in escorting and protecting merchant ship convoys in the Atlantic. These Allied convoys were crucial to the war effort, enabling the movement of desperately needed civilian supplies, machinery, armaments, and troops on merchant ships between North America and Britain. Norwegian ships had also been active in escorting convoys to and from Murmansk in the Soviet Union and took part in the Allied invasion of North Africa as well. They were also constantly involved in clandestine operations and raids against German shipping in Norwegian waters. A single campaign that proved the worth of Norwegian naval prowess was the sinking of the German battleship, the Scharnhorst, on December 26, 1943. The Norwegian ship involved in that victory was the H-Nor MS Stord, a modern S-class destroyer which had been transferred to the Norwegian Navy in August of that year. She had joined the Royal Naval Home Fleet's 51st Destroyer Flotilla, which deployed from Scapa Flow in Scotland. The battle that night took place about 60 nautical miles off North Cape in Norway in what was the flotilla's Battle of the Arctic. H-Nor MS Stord, along with British ships in the flotilla, had chased the German battleship at maximum speed for 2 hours. She finally fired 8 torpedoes when just 1,300 meters or about 4,200 feet from the Scharnhorst. The German battleship eventually sank in large part due to the torpedo attack. The commanding officer of one of the British ships involved in the battle, HMS Duke of York, would later say in an interview to the Evening News that The Norwegian destroyer Stord carried out the most daring attack of the whole action. For the decisive D-Day campaign in June 1944, Norway joined the Allies' armed forces comprised of units from the United States, Great Britain, Canada, France, the Netherlands, Poland, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Greece. The Norwegian Navy's contribution consisted of 10 marine vessels and 43 merchant ships. Unfortunately, H-Nor MS Svenner, an S-class destroyer, was hit and destroyed by a German torpedo on the very first day of the invasion. She sank rapidly with 34 of her crew losing their lives. The Norwegian cruiser was the very first casualty of the Great D-Day Armada. The fleet of Norwegian naval ships and merchant vessels were instrumental in transporting ammunition, equipment, fuel, supplies, and troops throughout the D-Day invasion and ongoing campaign to breach Normandy thereafter. The Free Norway Navy lost 27 ships during its tenure after the German invasion of 1940. A further 933 men, or 25% of men manning Norwegian naval ships, lost their lives. The famous Shetland Bus fleet alone lost 18 fishing vessels in its brave campaign. Trygve Hansen was a 97-year-old surviving Norwegian veteran of the D-Day landings when he was interviewed. With tears in his eyes, Hansen would say, "We helped put an end to the war." He and his fellow Norwegian sailors of World War II certainly did that.